The ocean was not blue. It was a suffocating, coagulated red, thick as arterial blood and boiling at the seams. Izuku Midoriya did not know how he knew this, but every time he closed his eyes, he was there. He was suspended in a trench so deep that light itself was crushed by the pressure. Around him, the water hissed, turning to steam as it made contact with his skin. He couldn't see his own body, but he could feel it, a massive, mountainous thing, heavy with a suffering so ancient and profound it defied the limits of human comprehension. He was burning from the inside out. His veins felt like rivers of molten glass. His bones ached with the strain of holding up a mass that shouldn't exist. There was a sound, too, a rhythmic, deafening thud, 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 thud. It was his heartbeat. But it sounded like the steady march of a dying god. It sounded like a warning. Pain, a voice echoed in the cavernous expanse of his mind. It wasn't a human voice. It was a sensation translated into thought. Agony. Too hot. Must breathe. Must adapt. Must survive. Izuku tried to open his mouth to scream, to call out for his mother, or for All Might, but his jaw felt strangely disconnected. When it opened, it did not stop at a human limit. It unhinged, splitting down the center, and from the depths of his throat came a sound that fractured the seabed, a long, guttural, metallic shriek that caused the red ocean to violently erupt. Izuku shot up in bed, gasping for air. His lungs seized, desperate for oxygen, as he clawed at his chest. His bedroom was dark, save for the faint glow of the street lights filtering through the all-night curtains. He was drenched in sweat. Not just sweat, he realized as he pressed a trembling hand to his forehead, it was steam. Faint wisps of white vapor curled off his shoulders, dissipating into the cool air of his room. He threw off the blankets, which were practically singed, and stumbled out of bed. The floorboards were cold, a welcome relief against the burning soles of his feet. He staggered to the small ensuite mirror in his bathroom and flicked on the light. A 14-year-old boy stared back at him. Bushy green hair, large emerald eyes, a face dusted with freckles. He looked painfully, fragilely normal. He looked like the quirkless weakling that the world told him he was, but Izuku knew the truth. There was nothing normal about the heat that radiated from his core. He reached for the digital thermometer kept on the sink counter. He placed it under his tongue and waited. A few seconds later, it beeped aggressively. He pulled it out and read the glowing red numbers. 42.5 degrees Celsius, 108.5 degrees Fahrenheit. For a normal human being, this temperature meant severe brain damage. It meant immediate hospitalization. It meant death. For Izuku Midoriya, it was Tuesday. He let out a long, ragged sigh, splashing cold water on his face. The water hissed slightly as it hit his cheeks. He remembered the doctor's visits when he was 4 years old. The sterile, white rooms, the cold stethoscope. The grim look on the doctor's face as he explained that Izuku lacked the genetic markers for a quirk. He had the extra joint in his pinky toe, the universal sign of a baseline human. But that diagnosis had never explained the nightmares. It had never explained why, when Izuku was stressed or frightened, his body temperature spiked to lethal degrees. The doctors had called it a bizarre psychosomatic fever, a rare but harmless genetic anomaly that had nothing to do with quirk factors. His body just runs hot, the specialist had said, baffled. His cellular metabolism is operating at a rate I've never seen, but there is no quirk factor. He's just strange. His mother, Inko, had cried for days. She had apologized, over and over, blaming herself for giving birth to a quirkless child who also suffered from a terrifying, inexplicable chronic condition. Izuku didn't blame her. But he couldn't shake the feeling that the doctor was wrong. He wasn't just running hot. He was containing something. He felt it every day, a restless, dormant energy coiled tight in his chest, waiting for a crack in his ribcage to burst free. Izuku? Sweetie? His mother's voice, soft and laden with perennial worry, drifted from the hallway. There was a gentle knock on the bathroom door. I'm okay, Mom, Izuku called out, trying to keep his voice steady. He quickly ran the tap, attempting to wash away the sweat and the faint, unsettling smell of ozone and sulfur that always lingered after the nightmares. The door creaked open, and Inko peeked in. Her eyes immediately darted to the thermometer resting on the edge of the sink. She didn't need to read the numbers. The sheer amount of steam rising from her son's shoulders told her everything. Another nightmare? She asked softly, her eyes welling with tears as she stepped inside. She placed a hand on his back. Even through his shirt, he felt like a radiator left on maximum heat. Yeah, Izuku muttered, leaning into her touch despite knowing he was probably uncomfortable to hold. The same one. The red water. The pressure. Inko's face tightened with sorrow. She wet a washcloth with cold water and gently pressed it to the back of his neck. I'll call the school. You can stay home today. We can try those new cooling patches the doctor prescribed. No! Izuku turned, perhaps a bit too quickly. The sudden movement made his vision swim with spots of purple and black. No, Mom, I have to go. We're getting our career forms today. I want to apply for UA. Inko's hand paused. The washcloth dripped onto the linoleum floor. The silence in the small bathroom stretched, heavy and suffocating. Izuku. Inko whispered, the heartbreak evident in her voice. UA high, baby, you know what the doctor said. The stress, your body can't handle extreme physical exertion. Your core temperature. I can handle it, Izuku lied, his fists clenching at his sides. I have to. I'm going to be a hero, Mom. Just like All Might. He always saves people with a smile, no matter how much it hurts. Inko looked at her son. She saw the fierce determination in his green eyes, but beneath it, she saw the exhaustion. She saw a boy whose own body felt like a cage. She didn't say anything more. She just pulled him into a hug, ignoring the unnatural, searing heat radiating from his skin. Just be careful, Izuku, she murmured into his hair. Please. Aldera Junior High was a loud, chaotic place, a breeding ground for adolescent egos inflated by flashy quirks. For Izuku, it was an obstacle course of avoidance. The spring air was mild, but Izuku felt like he was walking through a furnace. His internal temperature hadn't dropped below 40 degrees Celsius all morning. He sat at his desk, his uniform jacket draped over his chair, the top 2 buttons of his shirt undone. He was sweating profusely, trying to focus on his hero analysis for the future notebook, but the lines on the page kept blurring. Must adapt. Must survive. The voice from the nightmare echoed faintly in his ears. He shook his head, slapping his cheeks to focus. He just needed to get through the day. So, as third-year students, it's time to start thinking seriously about your futures. The homeroom teacher announced, standing at the front of the class with a stack of papers. I'll pass out handouts for your future plans now, but you're all pretty much planning to go into the hero course, right? The classroom erupted in cheers. Students showed off their quirks, stretchy arms, elemental bursts, minor levitation. The teacher laughed, trying to calm them down. Yes, you all have wonderful quirks. But remember, using them in school is against the rules. Sensei. Don't lump me in with these losers. The loud, arrogant voice cut through the noise like a knife. Katsuki Bakugo leaned back in his chair, his feet kicked up on his desk, a smirk plastered across his face. I'm the real deal. These guys will be lucky to end up as sidekicks to some busted D-lister. The class immediately turned on him in an uproar, but Bakugo just scoffed, letting off a few warning sparks from his palms. Bring it on, extras! Izuku shrank down in his seat. He had known Katsuki, Kaken, since they were toddlers. Once upon a time, they had been friends, but the moment Katsuki manifested his powerful explosion quirk, and Izuku manifested nothing but an inexplicable fever, the divide between them became an insurmountable chasm. Katsuki was a prodigy, Izuku was a defect. Bakugo, you're going for UA High, right? The teacher asked, looking at his clipboard. The class gasped. UA was the most prestigious hero academy in the country. The acceptance rate was abysmally low. That's exactly why it's the only place worthy of me, Bakugo declared, standing up and puffing out his chest. I aced all the mock tests. I'm the only one at this school who could possibly get in. I'm gonna surpass All Might and become the top hero, and my name will be inscribed on the list of top earners. Oh, right, the teacher muttered, glancing down at his papers. Midoriya wanted to go to UA too, didn't you? The classroom went dead silent. Izuku froze. His heart skipped a beat. Then, the entire room exploded into laughter. Midoriya? No way! You can't get into the hero course just by studying. He doesn't even have a quirk. What's he gonna do, sweat on the villains? Izuku gripped the edges of his desk, his knuckles turning white. They got rid of that rule. He stammered, his voice trembling. There's no rule against quirkless people applying anymore. I could be the first. Crash! Before Izuku could blink, his desk was blown violently backward. The force of the explosion sent him tumbling to the floor, his back hitting the chalkboard with a dull thud. Smoke filled his nostrils. Bakugo stood over him, his palms smoking, a look of pure, unadulterated rage on his face. Listen up, Deku, Bakugo snarled, his crimson eyes narrowing. You're even worse than the rest of these rejects. You're quirkless. You're a liability. You think you can rub shoulders with me? Izuku scrambled backward, his hands held up in defense. No, wait, Kaken. It's not like I'm trying to compete with you or anything. Believe me. It's been my dream since I was little. And, there's no harm in trying, right? Try. Bakugo stepped forward, the heat from his hands rolling off him in waves. What can you even do? You're a defective freak who gets a fever if he runs too fast. You'd die in the entrance exam. Something dark twisted in Izuku's chest. The heat radiating from Bakugo's palms was intense, but it felt like a matchstick compared to the raging inferno buried deep inside Izuku's biology. For a terrifying, fleeting second, Izuku didn't feel fear. He felt an overwhelming, primal surge of aggression. He felt the urge to open his mouth and let out a roar that would shatter the windows, to unleash a heat that would melt Bakugo's bones to slag. The skin on Izuku's forearms began to itch violently. Beneath the flesh, something was moving, something thick and scaled, trying to push its way to the surface. His core temperature spiked to 43 degrees Celsius. Burn him, the ancient voice hissed in his mind. Incinerate. Izuku clamped his jaw shut, biting his tongue until he tasted copper. He squeezed his eyes shut, forcing the horrific urge down, locking it away in the deepest part of his mind. He couldn't let it out. He didn't know what it was, but he knew it was destruction incarnate. He forced his muscles to relax. The strange movement beneath his skin subsided, leaving him trembling and breathless. Bakugo stared at him, scoffing in disgust. He hadn't noticed the momentary shift in Izuku. All he saw was a pathetic, cowering boy. The bell rang, signaling the end of the day. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of humiliation. When classes finally ended, Izuku was the last to pack his bag. He was exhausted. Fighting his own body took more energy than any workout ever could. He reached for his hero analysis notebook, but a scarred hand snatched it away. I don't know what you think you're doing, Deku, but we're not done, Bakugo said, waving the notebook. His two lackeys stood behind him, snickering. Kaken, give it back, Izuku pleaded, reaching for it. Bakugo didn't reply. He simply clamped his hands together with the notebook between them. There was a bright flash, a loud pop, and the smell of burning paper. Izuku watched in horror as his life's work was reduced to a charred, smoking mess. With a casual flick of his wrist, Bakugo tossed the ruined book out the open window. It landed in a small koi pond below with a depressing splash. Most top-tier heroes have stories about their school days, Bakugo said, leaning in close. How they were the only ones from their mediocre middle schools to make it big. I'm going to be the only one from this trash heap to get into You Don't Apply, Deku. Bakugo turned and walked toward the door. He paused, looking over his shoulder with a cruel, mocking smile. If you want a quirk so badly, there's a quick way to get one. Take a swan dive off the roof and pray you'll be born with a quirk in your next life. The words hung in the air, heavy and venomous. Izuku froze. The rage, that deep, simmering, radioactive rage, bubbled up again. His fists clenched so tightly his fingernails drew blood from his palms. He turned, glaring at Bakugo's back, his mouth opening to say something. But Bakugo raised a hand, small explosions popping aggressively from his palm. Yeah? What? The ancient voice went silent. Izuku swallowed hard, looking away. He couldn't do it. He couldn't fight back. He was a coward. He waited until they left, then quietly walked out of the classroom, down the stairs, and out into the courtyard. He fished his ruined notebook out of the koi pond, apologizing softly to the fish that swam around it. The pages were soaked and burned, much like his spirit. The walk home was a blur of self-pity and exhaustion. The afternoon sun beat down on the city of Muzidafu, but to Izuku, it felt cold compared to the furnace inside him. He decided to take the shortcut under the bridge, a shadowed, quiet route that kept him out of the bustling crowds. He dragged his feet, staring down at his red sneakers. Take a swan dive off the roof. Tears pricked the corners of his eyes. Idiot, he muttered to himself, his voice thick with emotion. You can't just say things like that. What if I actually did it? You'd be charged with instigating suicide. What a stupid thing to say. He was so lost in his own despair that he didn't hear the wet, squelching sound emerging from the manhole cover behind him. A medium-sized meat suit. A gurgling, wet voice hissed. Perfect. You'll do nicely to hide me. Izuku stopped. A chill ran down his spine. He turned around, his eyes widening in absolute terror. Rising from the sewer grate was a massive, amorphous blob of dark green sludge. It towered over him, shifting and undulating. Embedded in the center of the liquid mass were two bulging, manic eyes and a jagged mouth full of crooked teeth. A villain. Izuku's legs locked. His brain screamed at him to run, to turn around and sprint as fast as he could, but his body wouldn't obey. Don't worry, the sludge villain crooned, lunging forward with horrifying speed. It'll only hurt for about 45 seconds. Then, it'll all be over. Before Izuku could even raise his arms to defend himself, the sludge crashed into him like a tidal wave. Thick, foul-smelling slime wrapped around his waist, pinning his arms to his sides, lifting him off his feet. Izuku thrashed, kicking his legs wildly, but it was like fighting a swamp. The villain laughed, a wet, sloppy sound. Good boy. Keep struggling. It makes it easier for me to slip inside. The slime forced its way up Izuku's chest and clamped over his mouth and nose. Izuku gasped in shock, but instead of air, his lungs filled with vile, tasting sludge. He choked, gagging violently, his hands desperately clawing at the liquid covering his face. His fingers slipped through the slime, unable to find purchase. I can't breathe, Izuku thought, his mind spiraling into sheer panic. I'm dying. I'm actually going to die. You're my hero, kid, the villain mocked, the pressure tightening. I didn't think he'd track me down this fast. I just need to borrow your body for a while. Izuku's vision began to darken at the edges. Black spots danced across his eyes. His lungs burned, screaming for oxygen. The pain in his chest was unbearable. He thought of his mother, waiting for him at home. He thought of All Might. He thought of all the dreams he was about to lose in a dirty tunnel. His struggles grew weaker. His hands fell away from his face. His eyes rolled back. He was dying. And then, deep within the cellular structure of Izuku Midoriya, something woke up. It wasn't a quirk. Quirks were mutations, biological add-ons, evolutionary steps forward for humanity. What slumbered inside Izuku was not an add-on. It was a completely different operating system. It was the genetic memory of an apex predator that had existed millions of years ago, a creature that had been bombed, irradiated, burned, and mutilated, and had responded to all of it with one simple, terrifying mandate: evolve. The threat of death did not bring peace. It triggered a biological failsafe that had been waiting for 14 years to activate. Izuku's eyes snapped open. The sludge villain paused, feeling a sudden, intense heat radiating from the boy's body. What the? The villain muttered. The slime in contact with Izuku's skin began to bubble. Izuku's pupils, normally large and expressive, dilated until his eyes were completely black, and then, a milky, translucent membrane slid over them. They looked dead. They looked like the eyes of a deep-sea fish. The temperature around them skyrocketed. The concrete walls of the tunnel began to sweat. Pain, the voice roared in Izuku's mind. But it wasn't a separate entity anymore. It was him. Must not die. Must breathe. Must adapt. Izuku opened his mouth. Hey, keep your mouth shut, you brat, AGH. The sludge villain shrieked as the slime inside Izuku's throat was flash-boiled into steam. Izuku's jaw didn't stop opening. It opened past the point of human capability. There was a sickening crack as his mandible unhinged, splitting at the chin. Blood, thick and unnaturally dark, poured from his torn lips, instantly boiling as it hit the air. "What are you?" the villain screamed, trying to pull away. "You're burning me." But the villain couldn't let go. Izuku's body was expanding. It wasn't a magical transformation surrounded by glowing light. It was horrific, visceral body horror. Izuku's clothes tore to shreds as his ribcage violently expanded, the bones snapping and reknitting themselves in seconds. His spine arched backward at a grotesque angle, snapping the villain's hold. From the base of his tailbone, flesh tore open with a sickening squelch. A massive, fleshy tail, thick as a tree trunk and oozing red fluid, erupted outward, slamming into the tunnel wall and cracking the concrete. Izuku was no longer a boy. He was a mass of rapidly dividing, hyper-evolving cells. His skin melted off, revealing wet, raw, sinewy muscle that quickly hardened into thick, jagged, tan-colored flesh. He fell forward onto his hands and knees, but his arms were shrinking, becoming useless, vestigial appendages pinned against his rapidly swelling chest. His legs thickened, bowing outward, the bones shattering and restructuring into the reverse-jointed legs of an amphibian. But he still needed to breathe. The sludge was still in his system, choking him. On either side of his long, newly formed, serpentine neck, the flesh began to bulge. Deep, jagged gills tore themselves open on his neck. From the open wounds, hundreds of gallons of boiling, coagulated red fluid spewed out, forcefully expelling the remnants of the sludge villain from his respiratory tract. The fluid coated the walls of the tunnel, melting the concrete and filling the air with the suffocating stench of copper, radiation, and cooked meat. The sludge villain was thrown back, his liquid body partially boiled away by the sheer thermal output of the creature before him. "Monster!" the villain shrieked, scrambling backward in absolute terror. "You're a monster!" Izuku couldn't hear him. Izuku couldn't hear anything over the sound of his own agonizing rebirth. He dragged himself forward, out from under the shadow of the bridge and into the open street. He was a nightmare made flesh. He was roughly 20 feet long, a hunched, amphibious monstrosity that looked half-formed and completely alien. His body was a fleshy, sickly tan, with a trail of jagged, unformed dorsal plates running down his back. His massive, round, dead eyes stared blankly ahead. Form 2. Kamada-kun. Izuku's consciousness was drowning in an ocean of pain. He couldn't see correctly. Everything was a blurry smear of heat signatures. He couldn't walk. His newly formed legs were too weak to support his massive weight. So he crawled. He slithered forward, dragging his enormous body across the asphalt. Every movement was agony. The asphalt beneath his belly hissed and melted, leaving a scorched trail. His gills flared with every labored breath, spewing more of the boiling red blood across the street. Cars swerved and crashed into light poles as drivers panicked. Civilians on the sidewalk screamed, dropping their groceries and scattering in every direction. "What is that thing? Villain attack! Call the heroes! Oh my God, it's bleeding everywhere!" Izuku didn't want to hurt them. Deep down, trapped inside a cage of bone and boiling blood, the 14-year-old boy was screaming for help. "Stop!" he cried internally. "Please stop! I'm hurting them. It hurts. Everything hurts." He thrashed his head from side to side, trying to regain control. His massive tail whipped out instinctively, slamming into a parked car. The vehicle crumpled like tinfoil and was sent flying through the front window of a convenience store. Glass shattered, raining down on the pavement. More screaming. More terror. Izuku tried to speak. He tried to say, "I'm sorry," but what came out of his unhinged, blood-soaked maw was a guttural, terrifying roar that rattled the windows of every building on the block. It sounded like the twisting of thick metal, mixed with the cry of a dying animal. He dragged himself further down the street, his heavy head swaying. He was so hot. The world was too cold. He needed to find water. He needed to find relief from the burning in his veins. He didn't realize he was destroying the city just by moving. A street lamp caught on his shoulder, and he pulled it down effortlessly, severing power cables that sparked and danced wildly on the wet, bloody pavement. The ground shook with his every slithering lurch. Must evolve. Form is inefficient. Gravity is crushing. The cellular mandate was pushing him again. His hind legs spasmed violently. He felt the urge to stand, to force his bones to thicken into pillars that could support him upright. No! Izuku's human soul fought back with everything he had. Stop it! You're destroying everything. Stop! Suddenly, a massive shadow fell over him. The wind pressure shifted violently. A figure dropped from the sky, landing on the pavement 20 yards away with a force that cratered the asphalt. Have no fear! A booming, larger-than-life voice echoed through the ruined street. For I am here. It was All Might. The #1 hero stood tall, his legendary cape billowing in the wind, his fists planted firmly on his hips. He had been tracking the sludge villain all day. He had followed the trail of destruction, expecting to find the slimy rogue holding hostages. Instead, he found a biological catastrophe. All Might's iconic smile faltered for a fraction of a second. The creature before him was horrifying. It looked like an aborted fetus of a sea monster, trailing blood and melting the street. It was thrashing violently, smashing storefronts not out of malice, but out of sheer, uncoordinated agony. A new villain, or a runaway quirk mutation? All Might muttered to himself, his muscles tensing. Whatever it is, it needs to be stopped before there are casualties. All Might dropped into a sprinter's stance. Texas. Izuku's blurry, heat-sensing vision locked onto the massive figure. He knew that silhouette. He knew that voice. It was his idol. It was the man he had worshipped since he could walk. All Might. Izuku tried to reach out. He tried to lift his tiny, vestigial arms, but they were useless. His massive, fish-like head rose from the ground, swaying drunkenly. Smash! All Might lunged forward at blinding speed, drawing his fist back to deliver a concussive blast of wind pressure that would knock the beast unconscious. But as All Might closed the distance, he looked into the creature's eyes. They were large, unblinking, and dead. But from the corner of one massive, translucent eye, a single, clear tear rolled down, cutting through the boiling red blood on its face. The creature didn't attack. It didn't bare its teeth. It just stared at the hero, and for a fleeting, impossible second, the guttural hiss escaping its throat sounded eerily human. Help me. All Might froze. The hero's instincts, honed by decades of fighting, screamed at him to stop. This wasn't a monster. This was a victim. All Might pulled his punch at the last millisecond. Instead of striking the creature, he shifted his weight, slamming his fist into the ground just beside the beast's head. The resulting shockwave tore up the street, creating a massive cloud of dust and debris, but it spared the creature the brunt of the impact. The sheer force of the wind, however, was enough to overwhelm Izuku's already exhausted, agonizingly overtaxed nervous system. The biological imperative, recognizing that it could not withstand a fight with this new apex predator in its current, half-baked state, initiated a rapid regression to preserve energy and life. Izuku's massive body convulsed. A horrifying screech ripped from his throat as the transformation reversed violently. Massive amounts of white steam erupted from his body, completely blinding the street in a thick, radioactive fog. The steam was so dense and hot that All Might had to shield his face, coughing as the smell of ozone and burnt flesh overwhelmed him. Where did it go? All Might yelled, waving his massive arms to clear the steam. Did it escape? The fog slowly began to dissipate. The towering, fleshy monstrosity was gone. The pool of boiling blood on the street was rapidly evaporating, leaving behind nothing but scorched asphalt and melted cars. All Might stepped forward cautiously, his eyes scanning the crater he had made. There, lying motionless in the center of the destruction, was a small, fragile figure. It was a boy. He was completely naked, his clothes having been shredded by the transformation. His pale skin was covered in angry, red-burned scars that looked terrifyingly like scales, concentrated mainly on his back and along his spine. He was curled into a fetal position, shivering violently, despite the intense heat radiating from his skin. All Might stood paralyzed, his blue eyes wide with shock. The creature, the city-destroying nightmare, was a child. All Might quickly shrugged off his oversized jacket and stepped forward, draping it over the unconscious boy. As his hand brushed the boy's shoulder, All Might hissed, pulling his fingers back. The boy's skin was incredibly hot, nearly boiling. Izuku groaned weakly, his eyes fluttering open for just a moment. The dead, fish-like stare was gone, replaced by human eyes, emerald green, filled with tears, and heavy with an unbearable sorrow. He looked up at the towering figure of his hero. "I'm sorry," Izuku whispered, his voice hoarse and raw. "I didn't mean to." His eyes rolled back, and he fell into a deep, merciful unconsciousness. All Might stared down at the boy, the jacket swallowing the child's small frame. The number one hero looked around at the devastated street, the melted concrete, the terrified civilians watching from afar. He had saved the day from the sludge villain, who was now just a dried, crusted stain on the nearby wall, annihilated by the boy's heat. But there was no victory here. There was no smiling to reassure the public. All Might gently scooped the burning boy into his arms, cradling him against his chest. He felt the rapid, thundering heartbeat against his own, a heartbeat that did not belong to a normal human. "Just hold on, young man," All Might whispered, his voice devoid of its usual booming bravado. "I've got you." With a powerful leap, All Might launched himself into the sky, leaving the ruined street behind. He didn't head for the police station. He didn't head for a normal hospital. He headed for the secure, underground medical facilities of Tartarus. Because All Might knew, with absolute certainty, that whatever was inside this boy, it was a power that could either save the world, or reduce it to ashes. And for the first time in his life, the symbol of peace felt a genuine, primal fear of what the future held. The rhythmic, synthetic beep of a heart monitor was the first thing to pierce the dark void of Izuku Midoriya's consciousness. It was a slow, steady sound, but it felt remarkably distant, like it was echoing down a long metal corridor. Izuku tried to open his eyes, but his eyelids felt as heavy as lead. When he finally managed to pry them apart, he was met with the harsh, blinding glare of fluorescent surgical lights. He blinked against the stinging brightness, his vision slowly swimming into focus. He wasn't in his bedroom. He wasn't in a normal hospital, either. The ceiling was made of thick, reinforced steel plating. The walls were a dull, utilitarian gray, completely devoid of windows or artwork. Thick cables ran along the corners of the room, connecting to a massive array of medical equipment that hummed with heavy electrical currents. Izuku tried to sit up, but a heavy resistance held him down. He looked down and panicked. Thick, padded restraints were strapped across his chest, waist, wrists, and ankles, pinning him to a heavy-duty medical cot. He was wearing a hospital gown made of a strange, metallic woven fabric, but what scared him the most was the glass. The entire front wall of the room was a pane of thick, heavily tinted observation glass. He was in a cell. "And Mom?" Izuku rasped. His throat felt like it had been scoured with sandpaper. It tasted faintly of pennies and ash. "Mom, where am I?" A hiss of pneumatics echoed through the chamber, and a heavy steel door on the side of the room slid open. Two figures stepped inside. The first was a tall man in a tan trench coat and a matching fedora. He had a kind but deeply tired face, and he carried a thick manila folder. The second figure made Izuku's breath hitch. It was him. The man from the street. The number one hero, All Might, in his full, towering glory. He wasn't smiling, though. His sharp blue eyes were somber, filled with a complex mixture of pity, awe, and caution. "Do not panic, young Midoriya," All Might said, his booming voice slightly muffled by the sheer thickness of the room's acoustics. "You are safe. And your mother is safe. We have informed her that you were caught in a localized villain incident and are receiving specialized care. She does not know the specifics." "The specifics?" Izuku echoed, his heart rate beginning to climb. The monitor beside him beeped faster. He felt the familiar, terrifying warmth building in his gut. The temperature in the room imperceptibly ticked upward. The man in the trench coat held up a hand in a placating gesture. "Breathe, Midoriya. My name is Detective Naomasa Tsukachi. I am a trusted associate of All Might, and I work with the police force. We aren't here to arrest you. We are here to understand you." "Understand me?" Izuku's voice cracked. Memories of the previous day hit him like a freight train. The sludge villain. The suffocation. The agonizing, bone-shattering pain. The red water. The monstrous, thrashing body that wasn't his own. The melted street. Oh God, Izuku choked out, tears instantly welling in his eyes. He squeezed them shut, straining against the restraints. I did it. The street, the fire. I became a monster. Midoriya, look at me, All Might commanded, his voice firm but undeniably gentle. He stepped closer to the bed, placing a massive, warm hand over Izuku's restrained wrist. You were attacked. You were suffocating. Your body reacted to save your life. No civilians were killed. The villain you encountered survived, albeit severely burned. You are not a murderer. Izuku let out a shuddering sob, the tension bleeding out of his shoulders. I didn't mean to. I tried to stop it, but it hurt so much. It felt like I was burning alive. Sukachi sighed, opening the manila folder. That burning sensation is what we need to discuss, Izuku. You are currently in a classified subterranean medical wing beneath Tartarus. We brought you here because the medical equipment at a standard hospital would have melted if they tried to draw your blood. Izuku blinked through his tears. What? I have a quirk called human lie detector, Sukachi explained gently. I know everything you just said is the truth. You had no control. You didn't mean to hurt anyone, but what the doctors found when they examined you. Izuku, it defies all known biological science. Sukachi pulled out a series of scans. Some looked like X-rays, others like complex genetic helix models. He held them up to the glass so Izuku could see. Since the dawn of quirks, society has categorized superhuman abilities through the quirk factor, a specific genetic mutation. But you, Izuku, you do not have a quirk factor. I know, Izuku whispered, looking down in shame. I'm quirkless. The doctors told me when I was 4. They were wrong, All Might rumbled. Sukachi nodded. You don't have a quirk, Izuku, because what you have isn't an evolutionary mutation. It's a completely different biological foundation. Your DNA is not stable. It is in a constant, violent state of rewriting itself. Your cells operate like a hyper-adaptive nuclear reactor. When you were facing death against that villain, your body didn't activate a power. It forcefully evolved your entire anatomical structure into an apex predator to ensure your survival. Izuku stared at the scans. A nuclear reactor? Your core body temperature is currently resting at 41 degrees Celsius, Sukachi read. Your blood carries trace amounts of an unknown, highly radioactive isotope. Thankfully, it decays rapidly outside your body, or that street would be uninhabitable for 1,000 years. But inside you, it is the fuel for your evolution. Sukachi closed the folder, his expression grave. The scientists here compared your genetic echoes to deep fossil records and classified pre-quirk anomalies. They believe you are carrying the genetic memory, perhaps even the soul, of an ancient, radioactive organism. A leviathan. A god of destruction. The room fell dead silent. Only the mechanical hum of the monitors remained. A god of destruction. Izuku felt sick. The voice in his nightmares. The urge to burn Bakugo just hours before. It wasn't just anger. It was a primal, ancient instinct that viewed humanity as nothing more than kindling. I'm a villain, Izuku whispered, the absolute despair evident in his voice. If I can't control it, if I evolve again, I could destroy the whole city. You should lock me up. You should freeze me or put me down before I hurt someone. No! All Might's voice boomed so loud the medical equipment rattled. Izuku flinched. All Might stepped forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the bed. But as he stood there, steam began to rise from his own body. Izuku watched in shock as the number 1 hero, the invincible symbol of peace, suddenly deflated. The massive muscles shrank, the golden hair drooped, and within seconds, a skeletal, frail man stood in All Might's place, coughing violently into a handkerchief. All Might? Izuku gasped, straining against his restraints. What happened to you? Are you hurt? Tashinori Yagi wiped blood from his chin, offering the boy a weak, sad smile. 5 years ago, a villain practically tore my stomach out. I've had multiple surgeries, and I can only do hero work for about 3 hours a day now. The rest of the time, I look like this. Sukachi looked away, respecting his friend's secret. Izuku was entirely speechless. I am showing you this, young Midoriya, because you showed me your true, agonizing form on that street, Toshinori said, pulling up a steel chair and sitting heavily beside the bed. You asked us to put you down. You called yourself a villain. But when I looked into your eyes yesterday, the eyes of a terrifying, towering monster, all I saw was a frightened young man shedding a tear and asking for help. Toshinori reached out, his bony hand resting on Izuku's knee. A villain does not weep for the collateral damage they cause. A villain does not beg to be stopped. You were enduring pain that would shatter the minds of pro-heroes, yet your only concern was the safety of the people on that street. You fought your own biology to keep from hurting us. Toshinori leaned forward, his sunken blue eyes burning with an intense, unyielding light. You are not a monster, Izuku Midoriya. You are a hero. The dam broke. Izuku threw his head back against the pillow and wept. He wailed, the sound echoing off the cold steel walls. All the years of being mocked, the terror of his own body, the fear of the nightmares, it all poured out of him. The man he idolized above all others had seen the worst, most terrifying part of his soul, and had called him a hero. Toshinori let the boy cry, keeping a steady, comforting hand on his knee. When Izuku's sobs finally subsided into exhausted hiccups, Toshinori spoke again. I have been looking for a successor, Izuku. Someone to pass my quirk on to. For a moment, when I saw your heart, I considered offering it to you. Izuku's eyes widened. Pass your quirk? Yes. It is a power that can be transferred. But Toshinori sighed, looking at the medical charts. I cannot give it to you. If I introduce the explosive, stockpiled power of one for all into your hyperadaptive, radioactive biology, the doctors believe you would undergo critical mass. You wouldn't just evolve, you would detonate. You would become a planetary threat in seconds. Izuku swallowed hard, the terrifying image flashing in his mind. However, Toshinori smiled, a genuine, warm expression. You do not need my power. You already possess the strength of a god. You just need to learn how to master it. How to restrain it, and how to use it to protect. Toshinori stood up, his frail form suddenly seeming larger than life. I will not pass my quirk to you. Instead, I will be your sponsor. I will train you. I will teach you how to harness the beast within and forge it into a shield for humanity. Will you accept my help, Izuku? Izuku looked at the skeletal hero. He felt the burning in his chest, the ancient, restless energy waiting to be unleashed. He knew it would be agony. He knew he would have to face the darkest parts of himself. But looking at All Might, Izuku found his resolve. Yes, Izuku said, his voice trembling but fiercely determined. I will do it. I want to be a hero. 10 months later, the private, heavily reinforced training ground located on the outskirts of UA High School's property looked like a war zone. The concrete was scorched black, and the air shimmered with intense heat waves. Again. Toshinori barked, standing behind a thick blast shield, speaking through a megaphone. In the center of the cratered concrete stood Izuku. He was shirtless, wearing only specialized, fire-retardant combat pants. He was holding a massive steel I-beam, weighing roughly 2 tons, over his head. But Izuku wasn't using a quirk. He wasn't transformed. He was in his human state, but the changes to his body over the last 10 months were staggering. The frail, skinny boy was gone. Izuku's physique had become densely muscled, carved from stone. But it wasn't normal muscle. His skin had a slight, hardened sheen to it, and the scars from his first transformation, thick, jagged, scale-like keloids running down his spine, pulsed with a faint, angry red glow. He was sweating profusely, but the sweat turned to steam the moment it hit his skin. His internal temperature was currently sitting at 45 degrees Celsius. Hold it, young Midoriya! Toshinori called out. Control the thermal output. Do not let the cells dictate your actions. You are the master of your flesh. Too heavy, the ancient voice hissed in Izuku's mind. Flesh tearing. Must harden. Must evolve the arms. Grow the scales. Shut up. Izuku grunted aloud, his teeth gritted. He could feel the skin on his forearms itching frantically, the muscle fibers trying to tear themselves apart to make way for the black armor of the kaiju. He closed his eyes, focusing purely on his breathing. He visualized the burning, radioactive ocean in his mind, but instead of drowning in it, he imagined himself freezing the surface. He suppressed the evolutionary trigger through sheer, indomitable willpower. Slowly, the red glow beneath his spinal scars dimmed. The unbearable heat radiating from his body leveled off. With a massive shout, Izuku hurled the 2-ton I-beam forward. It crashed into the concrete wall 50 yards away, embedding itself deep into the stone. Izuku collapsed to his knees, gasping for air. A dense cloud of steam rolled off his back. Toshinori stepped out from behind the blast shield, a proud smile on his skeletal face. He tossed Izuku a specialized hyper-cooled water bottle. Izuku caught it and downed it in seconds, sighing as the icy liquid momentarily cooled his boiling core. "Excellent work, Izuku," Toshinori praised, walking over. "Your baseline human strength has increased exponentially. Because your cells are constantly breaking down and rebuilding denser than before, your physical parameters are already matching some pro heroes with strength enhancement quirks." Izuku wiped his mouth, looking at his hands. "It's still fighting me, All Might. Whenever I exert myself to the limit, I can feel it trying to take over. It wants to mutate, and you successfully suppressed it," Toshinori reminded him gently. "Evolution is a survival mechanism. By pushing your human form to its absolute limit, you are teaching your body that it does not need to transform to survive. You are setting the boundaries." Toshinori looked up at the sky. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the training ground. "Tomorrow is the UA entrance exam," Toshinori said, his tone turning serious. "You are applying as a regular student. No one outside of myself, Principal Nizu, and Detective Tsukachi knows the true nature of your biology. To the rest of the world, your quirk is registered as adaptive physiology. We must keep it that way for your safety." "I understand," Izuku nodded, standing up. He felt heavy, but powerful. "During the practical exam, you are to rely strictly on your enhanced baseline physicals," Toshinori instructed strictly. "Do not trigger a full transformation. Do not use the atomic heat. If you lose control in a populated arena—" "I won't," Izuku said firmly, looking his mentor in the eye. "I won't let the monster out. I'm going to pass this as Izuku Midoriya." The morning of the UA entrance exam was bright and crisp. Izuku stood before the towering, glass-fronted gates of UA High School. The sheer size of the campus was intimidating. Hundreds of hopeful students were funneling through the gates, chatting excitedly about their quirks and the upcoming trials. Izuku took a deep breath. His internal temperature was a steady, manageable 39 degrees Celsius. He wore his middle school uniform, though it fit tightly around his new, dense musculature. "Out of my way, Deku!" Izuku didn't even flinch as Katsuki Bakugo shoved past his shoulder. 10 months ago, Izuku would have stumbled and apologized profusely. Today, his body was so dense that Bakugo was the one who slightly bounced off him. Bakugo stopped, turning to glare at Izuku with a mixture of confusion and intense irritation. "What the hell? You actually showed up? You trying to get yourself killed, you quirkless freak?" Izuku met Bakugo's crimson eyes. For a fraction of a second, the ancient predator inside Izuku stirred, sizing up the explosive boy not as a threat, but as prey. Izuku quickly locked the instinct away, his expression remaining perfectly calm. "I'm not going to die, Kaken," Izuku said evenly, stepping past him. "I'm going to pass." Bakugo stood frozen for a moment, a cold sweat inexplicably prickling the back of his neck. He shook it off, snarling as he stomped toward the auditorium. Izuku continued walking, but the brief confrontation had distracted him. He didn't notice the uneven paving stone until his sneaker caught the edge of it. He pitched forward, bracing himself for the embarrassing impact of concrete against his face. But the impact never came. He stopped in midair, floating weightlessly an inch above the ground. "Are you okay?" Izuku looked up. Standing beside him was a girl with short, bobbed brown hair and large, warm brown eyes. She had one hand pressed together with the other, a soft pink glow emanating from her fingertips. "I stopped you with my quirk," she smiled brightly, gently releasing her technique so Izuku dropped the final inch to his feet. "I'm sorry I didn't ask first, but I figured you wouldn't want to fall on your face right before the exam." "That would be bad luck." Izuku stared at her. Aside from his mother, people didn't generally talk to him with such casual kindness. He felt a sudden, massive spike in his core temperature, but this time, it had absolutely nothing to do with Godzilla. His face turned bright red. Thank you? Izuku stammered, bowing awkwardly. I am Midoriya. Izuku. Nice to meet you, I'm Ochiko Uraraka. She beamed. Let's both do our best today, okay? With a cheerful wave, she jogged off toward the auditorium. Izuku stood there for a moment, a goofy smile spreading across his face. He felt incredibly human in that moment. The written exam went smoothly. Izuku had spent the last 10 months studying just as intensely as he had trained physically. When the practical orientation began, he sat quietly as Present Mike, the voice hero, enthusiastically explained the rules. 3 types of robotic villains, worth 1, 2, and 3 points respectively. Destroy them, get points. Simple. Then, a tall, severe-looking boy with glasses named Ida stood up, aggressively questioning the inclusion of a 4th, 0-point robot on the handout, and chiding Izuku for muttering during the presentation. Izuku politely apologized, keeping his head down. He didn't need to draw attention to himself. Before long, Izuku found himself standing before the massive doors of Battle Center B. He was wearing his green tracksuit, doing light stretches. The other examinees were sizing each other up, showing off their quirks. Izuku spotted Uraraka a few yards away, looking nervous. He wanted to go wish her luck, but before he could move, Ida placed a heavy hand on his shoulder, warning him not to distract her. Start! Present Mick's voice echoed from the watchtower. What's wrong? There are no countdowns in real battles. Run, run, run! The doors blasted open. While the other students hesitated for a split second, Izuku's body moved. His baseline physicals were superhuman. He kicked off the ground with enough force to crack the pavement, rocketing past the other students like a bullet. He entered the mock city first, his eyes scanning the alleys with terrifying, predatory precision. A 1-pointer rolled out from an intersection, its mechanical eyes locking onto him. Target acquired. Izuku didn't slow down. He ducked under its metallic arm, pivoting on his heel, and drove a fierce, bare-knuckle punch directly into its chassis. The sound of twisting metal shrieked through the air. Izuku's fist caved the robot's armor in completely, shattering its internal motherboard. The machine sparked and collapsed into a heap of scrap. 1 point, Izuku breathed, shaking his hand out. His knuckles were slightly bruised, but the dense cellular structure of his skin had protected his bones. He took off again. Over the next 7 minutes, Izuku fought fiercely. He used brute force, ripping a 2-pointer's arm off and using it as a bat to smash a 3-pointer. He was fast, efficient, and relentless. But he was falling behind. Other students had flashy, area of effect quirks. Explosions, lasers, ice, wide-range gravity manipulation. They were destroying 3 or 4 robots at a time. Izuku, relying solely on close-quarters physical combat, was exhausting himself just to keep up. 32 points, Izuku panted, wiping sweat from his brow. His internal temperature was rising to 42 degrees Celsius. The air around him was beginning to warp with heat waves. I need more points. If the cutoff is 50, I'm not going to make it. Evolve, the voice whispered, louder this time. They are machines. Burn them. Open your mouth. Let the fire out. No, Izuku muttered, gripping his head. No fire. Suddenly, the ground beneath his feet violently shuddered. It wasn't a small tremor, it was an earthquake. From the center of the mock city, a colossal shadow rose, blocking out the sun. The buildings crumbled like brittle toys as the 0-pointer rolled forward. It was massive, the size of a skyscraper, with a tread base that crushed everything in its path. Less than 2 minutes remaining, Present Mike announced. The other students screamed, turning and fleeing in absolute terror. This wasn't a target to fight. It was a natural disaster to run from. Izuku turned to run with them. He had 32 points. If he just found a few more stragglers on the way out. I'll help. Izuku froze. His enhanced hearing picked up a faint, pained cry through the sound of crumbling concrete. He turned his head. Near the base of the advancing 0-pointer, half buried under a slab of fallen debris, was Uraraka. She was trapped, her leg pinned, desperately trying to use her quirk to lift the rubble, but she was exhausted. The zero-pointer's massive treads were only 30 yards away from crushing her to paste. "Uraraka!" Izuku yelled, sprinting toward her. He reached the rubble and grabbed the concrete slab, pulling with all his baseline strength. His muscles bulged, veins popping on his forehead. "Come on, move!" The slab didn't budge. It was too heavy. The zero-pointer raised a massive, hydraulic arm, preparing to smash the street in front of it to clear its path. If that arm came down, the shockwave alone would kill them both. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. Izuku looked up at the towering machine. His human strength was not enough. He could not save her as Izuku Midoriya. "If I don't use it, she dies." Izuku let go of the rubble. He stood up, placing himself directly between Uraraka and the colossal machine. He closed his eyes. For 10 months, he had built a mental fortress to keep the kaiju locked away in the deepest, darkest trenches of his mind. Now, with a deep, shuddering breath, Izuku walked down into the dark and threw open the gates. "Adapt," Izuku commanded his own biology. "Give me the power to destroy it." The response was instantaneous and horrifying. Izuku's core temperature spiked from 42 degrees Celsius to a critical 600 degrees Celsius in a microsecond. The right side of his tracksuit instantly combusted, turning to ash as an unimaginable heat flared from his body. Uraraka gasped, shielding her face from the sudden, blistering wave of thermal energy radiating from the boy in front of her. Izuku threw his head back, a gut-wrenching, agonizing scream tearing from his lungs as his body underwent localized hyper-evolution. He didn't transform his whole body. He forced the mutation purely into his right arm and his back. The skin on his right arm split open with a sickening rip, but no blood poured out. Instead, thick, pitch-black, jagged scales erupted from the flesh, interlocking like impenetrable armor. The arm swelled, the bones snapping and restructuring, growing twice as thick and long as his human arm. The fingers elongated into terrifying, razor-sharp claws, running up his right shoulder and down his spine. His skin tore open as massive, craggy dorsal plates violently pushed their way out of his back. And then, the glow started. Between the black scales of his arm and the jagged edges of his dorsal plates, a brilliant, terrifying, neon purple and radioactive red light began to pulse. It was the color of a dying star. Thud. 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 The heartbeat of the god echoed through the courtyard, so loud that the fleeing students stopped and turned around in shock. In the observation room, the UE teachers stared at the monitors in stunned silence. What is that?" Midnight whispered, watching the thermal cameras max out and short-circuit. "His arm just mutated into something else," Aizawa noted, his eyes narrowing intensely. All Might stood rigidly in the back of the room, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles bled. "Izuku, control it. Do not let it consume you." Back in the mock city, the zero-pointer's massive arm came crashing down toward Izuku and Uraraka. Izuku didn't flinch. His black, scaled arm was practically vibrating with unstable kinetic and thermal energy. His eyes had shifted, the whites were black, and the irises were a glowing, toxic purple, Form 3 localized. He pulled his mutated arm back. The air around his fist distorted wildly, ionizing into purple plasma. Smash! Izuku roared, not with his human voice, but with a dual harmonic, the voice of a boy screaming in pain, layered over the metallic, earth-shattering shriek of Shin Godzilla. Izuku punched upward, his clawed fist colliding with the massive steel fist of the zero-pointer. The resulting impact did not create a normal shockwave. It created a catastrophic release of thermal and kinetic energy. A dome of purple fire and compressed air exploded outward from the point of impact. The sheer force of the blow shattered the zero-pointer's arm into microscopic shrapnel. But the energy didn't stop there. The blast traveled straight up the machine's arm, into its chassis, and violently blew the entire upper half of the colossal robot into the stratosphere. The sky itself seemed to part as a beam of purple kinetic force pierced the clouds. The shockwave hit the ground a second later. Windows shattered for miles. Students were thrown off their feet, tumbling across the pavement as a hurricane-force wind swept through the battle center, carrying with it the smell of ozone and absolute destruction. And then, there was silence. The bottom half of the zero-pointer stood paralyzed for a moment, before slowly tipping backward and crashing to the earth with a deafening boom. Izuku stood frozen in his punching stance. His mind was reeling. He had done it. He had saved her. But the cost of localized evolution was severe. Human bones and kaiju flesh were not meant to exist in the same space at the same time. The sheer, ungodly force of the atomic punch had a horrific recoil. The jagged, black scales on Izuku's arm began to crumble and crack. His human flesh, unable to contain the thermal output he had just channeled, began to literally cook from the inside out. Gah! Izuku fell to his knees, clutching his right arm. The mutation forcibly reversed itself, the black scales melting back into his skin, the dorsal plates sinking painfully back into his spine. What was left of his right arm was a gruesome sight. It was bruised a deep, sickly purple, horribly swollen, and twisted at an unnatural angle. Every bone from his fingertips to his shoulder had been pulverized into dust. Steam poured off his ruined limb, hissing as his radioactive blood boiled beneath the broken skin. He fell forward, hitting the concrete face first. The pain was beyond human comprehension. It made the sludge villain incident feel like a paper cut. Deku? Uraraka had managed to crawl out from under the now shifted rubble. She stared in horror at the ruined boy, dragging herself toward him. Deku! Are you okay? Oh my God, your arm! 1 point. Izuku slurred deliriously, his vision fading to black. Just 1 more point. The exam is over. President Mick's voice blared over the loudspeakers. Izuku didn't hear it. He slipped into the dark, welcoming void of unconsciousness, the rhythmic, ancient heartbeat in his chest finally slowing down to a quiet, satisfied hum. He had let the monster out. And for the first time in history, the god of destruction had not destroyed a city. It had saved a life. The process of healing was not a relief. It was a war fought on a microscopic battlefield, and Izuku Midoriya was the scorched earth left in its wake. He awoke in the subterranean medical wing beneath Tartarus. It was the only place equipped to handle him. When the UA entrance exam had concluded, All Might had immediately intercepted the medical robots, scooping Izuku's ruined, steaming body into his arms and vanishing before the other students or staff could ask questions. Izuku lay on the heavily reinforced cot, staring blankly at the steel ceiling. His right arm was encased in a specialized, temperature-resistant cast, but he could feel what was happening beneath it. Normal human bones took months to heal. Normal human flesh took weeks to knit back together. Izuku's cells did not have that kind of patience. His biology viewed the pulverized arm as a catastrophic failure of form, an unacceptable vulnerability that needed to be eradicated immediately. Beneath the cast, his arm was vibrating. It felt as though a colony of fire ants had been injected directly into his marrow. The cells were dividing at a terrifying, hypermetabolic rate. The crushed bone fragments dissolved into a thick, calcium-rich slurry in his bloodstream, instantly replaced by denser, thicker bone structures. Riven muscles snapped back together like elastic bands, thicker and tougher than before. The heat radiating from the cast was immense. The room's air conditioning was working overtime, the vents rattling as they pumped freezing air into the chamber to offset his 43 degrees Celsius core temperature. The boy's a walking nuclear furnace, a voice muttered. Izuku turned his head slowly. Standing behind the reinforced observation glass was Recovery Girl, Yue's legendary youthful heroine, alongside Tashinori Yagi and Detective Tsukachi. Tashinori pressed a button on the console, allowing their voices to transmit into Izuku's room. How are you feeling, young Midoriya? Itchy, Izuku croaked. His throat was parched. My arm, it feels like it's boiling. Recovery Girl sighed, tapping her cane against the glass. I tried to use my quirk on you when Tashinori first brought you in. My quirk accelerates the body's natural healing process by using the patient's stamina. But when I activated it on you, I had to sever the connection immediately. Izuku blinked, his milky, dilated pupils slowly shrinking back to their normal, human size. Why? Because your cells don't just heal, boy. They adapt. They evolve, Recovery Girl explained, her tone grave. When I introduced the stamina stimulant, your cells began to multiply so rapidly and violently that they began to generate localized radiation. If I had kept my quirk active for another 5 seconds, your arm wouldn't have just healed. It would have mutated into a completely different, unchecked appendage, and the resulting thermal explosion would have vaporized this entire facility. Izuku felt a cold spike of dread pierce his chest, momentarily cutting through the heat. He looked down at his casted arm. I almost blew them up. Just by being healed. You must heal naturally, Recovery Girl continued, her expression softening into one of deep sympathy. Though naturally for you means you will be fully recovered by tomorrow morning. Your body's regeneration is astonishing. But it is incredibly dangerous. You must never let a healing quirk be used on you again. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am, Izuku whispered. Toshinori stepped closer to the glass. Despite his skeletal, frail appearance, his eyes were bright with a fierce pride. Izuku. What you did out there today, it was reckless. You risked total biological collapse. You risked exposing your true nature to the world. Izuku looked down in shame. I know. I'm sorry. But, she was going to be crushed. Uraraka. I couldn't just leave her there. I couldn't. Toshinori smiled, a warm, radiant expression that transcended his physical weakness. I know you couldn't. And that is exactly why I chose to be your sponsor. Sukachi reached into his trench coat and pulled out a small, metallic disc. He pressed a button, and a holographic projection flared to life in the space between the glass and Izuku's bed. It was a recording of the UA judges panel. The examinee, Izuku Midoriya, accumulated 32 villain points. The voice of Principal Niza echoed from the projection. A respectable score, but just shy of the cutoff. The projection shifted, showing footage from one of the hidden city cameras. It showed Izuku, standing between Uraraka and the towering zero-pointer. It showed the localized mutation, the black scales, the glowing purple light, and the resulting devastating punch that annihilated the machine. However, Niza's voice continued over the footage. The entrance exam is not just about destroying villains. How can a hero course reject someone who saves others at the risk of his own life? We have a secondary metric. Rescue points. The scoreboard appeared on the hologram. Izuku Midoriya, 32 villain points. 60 rescue points. Total, 92 points. Izuku's breath hitched. The numbers blurred as tears filled his eyes. You place first, Izuku, Toshinori said softly. You passed. Welcome to your hero academia. Izuku didn't cheer. He didn't pump his fist in the air. He simply closed his eyes, tears streaming down his face and instantly vaporizing into steam against his burning cheeks. He had done it. He had taken the monster, the god of destruction that haunted his nightmares, and he had used it to save a life. But as the deep, rhythmic thud, thud, thud of his heart echoed in his ears, a chilling thought lingered in the back of his mind. Next time I open the cage, will I be able to close it? 1 week later. The first day of UA High School. The morning air of spring was crisp and sweet, but Izuku Midoriya couldn't smell it. As he walked toward the towering, H-shaped UA building, his senses were overwhelmed by a completely different spectrum of information. His biology was settling, adapting to his human form, but the enhancements to his baseline physiology were making it incredibly difficult to navigate a crowded world. He could smell the specific chemical composition of the deodorant the boy walking 3 paces ahead of him was wearing. He could hear the rapid, nervous heartbeat of a girl 50 yards away. But above all, he could smell himself. No matter how many showers he took, no matter how much soap he used, a faint, metallic scent clung to him. It smelled like the air right after a violent lightning storm, mixed with the harsh, sterile odor of sulfur and ash. It was the smell of radiation. The smell of a predator. He adjusted the collar of his uniform. His mother had been forced to alter it, taking out the seams in the shoulders and chest to accommodate his newly dense, heavily muscled frame. He looked older than 14. His jawline was sharper, his posture rigidly straight, not out of confidence, but out of a desperate need to maintain physical control over every single muscle fiber in his body. He finally reached the massive, comically large door labeled 1A. Izuku took a deep breath. His internal temperature was a manageable 38.5 degrees Celsius today. Just keep a low profile, he told himself. Don't draw attention. Don't engage Kaken. Just be normal. He slid the heavy door open. Take your feet off that desk immediately. Huh? Who the hell are you to tell me what to do, Four Eyes? Izuku's heart sank. Standing at the front of the classroom, aggressively chopping the air with his hands, was the tall, severe boy with glasses from the entrance exam, Tenya Ida. And sitting at the desk, his feet kicked up and a feral sneer on his face, was Katsuki Bakugo. It is disrespectful to the upperclassmen who sat there before us, and to the craftsman who made the desk. Ida barked. Bakugo scoffed, letting tiny sparks pop from his palms. Disrespectful? What middle school are you from, extra? I'll blow you to pieces. Izuku froze in the doorway. The moment Bakugo's sparks ignited, the scent of nitroglycerin hit Izuku's enhanced olfactory senses. Instantly, the ancient voice in his mind stirred. Explosives. Threat. Neutralize. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut, his fists clenching at his sides. He forced his breathing to slow, pushing the predatory instinct back down into the dark. Oh! It's you! Izuku snapped his eyes open. Standing right behind him, leaning slightly into his peripheral vision, was Achiko Uraraka. She was beaming, her round face radiating genuine warmth. You're the plain-looking boy who saved me! Uraraka cheered, stepping around him to face him. I knew you'd get in. That punch was amazing. Your quirk is so strong, and you look so cool with that black armor stuff on your arm, even if it did mess you up pretty bad. How's your arm, by the way? The rest of the classroom fell completely silent. Bakugo's head snapped toward the doorway. His crimson eyes locked onto Izuku. The sneer faded, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated shock, followed rapidly by a terrifying, boiling rage. Deku? Bakugo thought, his mind racing. Quirk? Black armor? What the hell is Roundface talking about? He's quirkless. He's a pebble. Ida marched over to the doorway, adjusting his glasses. You're the one who realized there was a hidden metric in the practical exam. I must apologize. I misjudged you. I am Tenya Ida. Izuku felt the weight of 20 pairs of eyes on him. He felt the sudden, aggressive spike in Bakugo's heart rate. The room felt entirely too small. The air felt too thin. I'm Izuku Midoriya, he managed to say, his voice tight. It's nice to meet you all. If you're just here to make friends, you can pack up your stuff and leave. The voice came from the floor. Izuku looked down. Lying on the ground just outside the doorway was a bright yellow sleeping bag. It zipped open, and a man with unkempt, shoulder-length black hair, severe bags under his eyes, and a thick gray scarf wrapped around his neck rolled out of it. He unzipped the bag entirely and stood up, pulling a juice pouch from nowhere and slurping it loudly. It took you lot 8 seconds to quiet down, the man droned, his voice devoid of any inflection. Time is a precious resource. You kids aren't rational enough. Izuku stared at the man. His enhanced senses went haywire. The man didn't smell like a hero. He didn't smell like flashy cologne or hairspray. He smelled like cheap coffee, blood, and the distinct, metallic scent of cold steel. He was a predator in his own right. I'm your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa, the man said, surveying the stunned class. Nice to meet you. Homeroom teacher? The class collectively panicked. This guy looks like a zombie. Aizawa didn't care about their shock. He reached into his sleeping bag and pulled out a blue and white UE gym uniform. Put these on and head out to the P grounds, Aizawa instructed, tossing the uniform onto the front desk. We're doing a quirk apprehension test. The locker room was a minefield of potential disaster. Izuku quickly claimed a locker in the far corner, turning his back to the rest of the boys. He stripped off his uniform jacket and shirt with practiced speed, terrified of anyone seeing his back. Ever since the entrance exam, the keloid scars running down his spine had grown. They were thicker now, jagged and heavily calloused, like the nascent dorsal plates of a reptile trying to push through the skin. They pulsed with a faint, localized heat. If anyone saw them, they would ask questions. Bakugo would ask questions. Whoa, Midoriya, dude! Izuku flinched, pulling the gym shirt over his head just as a boy with spiky red hair and sharp teeth walked over. Eijiro Kirishima, your muscles are insane, man. Kirishima grinned, gesturing vaguely to Izuku's chest and arms, which were visible as the shirt settled. You look like you're carved out of concrete. Is your quirk a strength enhancer? Izuku swallowed hard, his heart thumping. Something like that. It's an adaptive physiology quirk. It just makes me really dense. Kirishima bumped his fists together, a metallic clink echoing from his knuckles. Man, that's so manly. Mine's hardening. We're totally cut from the same cloth. Close combat brawlers, right? Alright, Izuku stammered, offering a weak smile. From across the room, Bakugo slammed his locker shut. The loud bang made everyone jump. Bakugo didn't say a word. He just glared at Izuku, his eyes burning with a hateful, confusing intensity, before storming out of the locker room. Izuku's temperature ticked up to 39 degrees Celsius. He knows something is wrong. He knows I didn't have this a year ago. 10 minutes later, Class 1A stood on the expansive dirt field of the UA training grounds. The sun was shining brightly, but the atmosphere was oppressively tense. A quirk apprehension test? Uraraka gasped. But what about the entrance ceremony? The orientation? If you're going to become a hero, you don't have time for such leisurely events, Aizawa said, standing before them with a digital tablet in his hand. UA's selling point is how unrestricted its school traditions are. That's also how the teachers run their classes. Aizawa turned his gaze to the students. His eyes lingered on Izuku for a fraction of a second longer than the others. You kids have been doing these standard fitness tests since middle school, Aizawa continued. Pitching, long jump, 50-meter dash. But you were never allowed to use your quirks. The country is still trying to pretend we are all created equal by taking averages of results without quirks. It's not rational. The Ministry of Education is procrastinating. Aizawa pointed to Bakugo. Bakugo, you finished first in the practical exam. What was your best result for the softball throw in middle school? 67 meters, Bakugo scoffed. Try doing it with your quirk, Aizawa said, tossing him a baseball. Do whatever you want, just don't leave the circle. Hurry up. Give it all you've got. Bakugo stepped into the white circle. He stretched his arms, a wicked grin spreading across his face. You asked for it. He wound up, pitching his arm back. As he threw the ball forward, he ignited a massive explosion from his palm. Die! The blast echoed across the field. The ball rocketed into the sky, leaving a trail of smoke before disappearing from sight completely. The class watched in awe. Aizawa held up his digital tracker. The screen beeped. 705.2 meters. Know your own maximum first, Aizawa said, showing the screen to the class. That is the most rational way to form the foundation of a hero. The class erupted into excited murmurs. 705 meters? Are you kidding me? I want to go. That looks like so much fun. We can use our quirks as much as we want. As expected of the hero course, Aizawa's eyes darkened. His scarf seemed to shift on its own, drifting slightly in an unseen wind. It looks like fun, you say? Aizawa's voice dropped to a terrifying, quiet register. You have 3 years to become heroes. Will you have an attitude like that the whole time? A heavy silence fell over the students. All right, Aizawa smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was a predatory grin. Whoever comes in last place in all 8 tests will be judged to have no potential, and will be punished with expulsion. Expulsion? The class screamed. We're free to do what we want with the circumstances of our students, Aizawa said, pulling his hair back from his face. Welcome to UA's hero course. Uraraka stepped forward, her fists clenched. Last place gets expelled? But it's the first day. No, even if it weren't, that's totally unfair. Natural disasters, Aizawa replied immediately. Mass accidents. Villains on a rampage. Calamities whose time and place can't be predicted. Japan is covered with unfairness. Heroes are the ones who reverse those situations. If you wanted to go talk to your friends at McDonald's after school, too bad. For the next 3 years, UA will do all it can to give you one hardship after another. Go beyond. Plus ultra. Overcome it with all you've got. Izuku stood perfectly still. His classmates were trembling with indignation and fear, but Izuku found himself strangely calm. Unfairness. He knew unfairness better than anyone here. Unfairness was being told you were worthless at 4 years old. Unfairness was having a body that actively tried to destroy you and everyone around you. Unfairness was the excruciating, burning agony of hyper-evolution. Aizawa wasn't being cruel. He was being honest. The world didn't care about your dreams. It cared about your capacity to survive. I will survive, Izuku thought, the faint, purple glow pulsing briefly beneath his shirt. I have to. Test 1. 50-meter dash, Aizawa called out. Izuku lined up against a boy with blonde hair and a sparkly belt named Aoyama. On your marks, get set. The robot at the finish line chimed. Bang! Izuku didn't use the kaiju's power. He didn't even tap into the localized mutation. He simply dropped his center of gravity and drove his massive, enhanced leg muscles into the dirt. The ground cracked beneath his sneakers. He shot forward with explosive kinetic force, tearing across the track in a blur. 5.55 seconds. The robot chimed. Izuku slowed down, exhaling a small puff of steam. It was an incredible time for a baseline human, but Aoyama had used a laser from his navel to propel himself backward, scoring a 5.51. Ida, using the engines in his calves, scored a 3.04. I'm fast, but I'm not Quark fast, Izuku realized, his anxiety slowly beginning to mount. Test 2. Grip strength. Izuku grabbed the digital measuring device. He squeezed, channeling his brute, dense muscular power into his hand. The machine beeped. 120 kilograms. It was strong. Incredibly strong. But down the line, a multi-armed boy named Shoji gripped his machine, and it beeped at 540 kilograms. Izuku stared at his hand. He felt the familiar, violent itch beneath his skin. The cells in his fingers were begging to be unleashed. Let us adapt, they whispered. Let us grow the claws. We can crush the steel into dust. No, Izuku whispered back, forcibly relaxing his hand. He placed the machine down and walked away, his temperature rising to 40 degrees Celsius. Test 3. Standing long jump. Izuku jumped clear across the sandbox using pure leg strength, but Bakugo blasted himself over it with explosions, and Uraraka floated across entirely. Test 4. Repeated side steps. Izuku did well, his stamina nearly boundless, but Mineta, a short boy with purple balls on his head, bounced back and forth at blistering speeds. By the time the 5th test rolled around, the softball throw, Izuku was sweating profoundly. Not because he was tired, but because he was terrified. He was placed consistently in the middle or bottom middle of the pack for every test. He wasn't failing, but he wasn't excelling. Against students with quirks designed specifically for these tasks, his enhanced baseline humanity wasn't enough to secure his safety. Aizawa stood near the throwing circle, his eyes calculating as he looked over the digital scores. Izuku Midoriya, Aizawa thought, pulling up the boy's file on his tablet. Registered quirk, adaptive physiology. Yet he hasn't shown a single overt quirk activation. He's relying entirely on physical strength. His scores are impressive for a quirkless body, but subpar for a hero course student. In the entrance exam, he destroyed the 0-pointer with a single, devastating blow. Why is he holding back? Is he arrogant? Or is there a drawback he's terrified of? Midoriya. You're up, Aizawa called out. Izuku stepped into the white circle. The softball felt incredibly light in his hand. He looked out at the vast, empty field. He glanced at the scoreboard projected on Aizawa's tablet. Izuku was currently sitting at 19th place. Last place was Mineta, but Mineta still had his ball throw, and his quirk was highly adaptable. If Izuku didn't score high here, he was going to be expelled. Expelled? On the first day, the weight of the last 10 months crashed down on him. The blood, the sweat, the burning agony. The promise he had made to All Might in the sterile hospital room. I want to be a hero. If he got expelled, it was over. He would be sent back to normal society, a ticking time bomb of radioactive evolution with no legal outlet to learn how to control it. Izuku closed his eyes. I have to do it. Just a little. Just the arm. Like the entrance exam, he gripped the softball. He planted his feet. He took a deep breath, visualizing the cage in his mind. He walked over to it, grasped the iron bars, and pulled the door open just a fraction of an inch. Evolve the arm. The reaction was instantaneous. Izuku's core temperature didn't just spike, it erupted. A shockwave of pure, blistering heat radiated outward from his body, causing the grass around his feet to instantly brown and wither. The students watching gasped, instinctively taking a step back as the air around Izuku began to violently distort. What the? Kirishima muttered, shielding his eyes. Is he on fire? Izuku's head threw back, a horrifying, guttural groan tearing from his throat. His eyes rolled back, turning entirely black, the milky membranes sliding over them. The skin on his right arm began to bulge. Snap. Crack. The sound of his bones restructuring echoed across the silent field. It didn't sound like a quirk activating. It sounded like a horrific injury. Izuku's uniform sleeve tore to shreds as thick, jagged, pitch-black scales violently pushed their way through his skin. Blood, unnaturally dark and boiling hot, sprayed from the micro-tears, sizzling into steam as it hit the air. Hey, what is he doing? Uraraka cried out in horror. His arm is tearing itself apart. Bakugo stared, his crimson eyes wide with disbelief. That's it. That's the black armor. What the hell is that? That's not a quirk. That's a monster. Izuku brought his mutated, heavily clawed arm back. The spaces between the black scales ignited with a terrifying, blinding purple light. The air pressure around him dropped sharply as the localized mutation began to draw in ambient kinetic energy, preparing to launch the ball with the force of a tactical missile. Aizawa stood 20 feet away, his heart turning to ice. He wasn't looking at a student preparing to do their best. He was looking at a child undergoing a catastrophic biological meltdown. The sheer amount of pain radiating from the boy was palpable. The kid's jaw was physically unhinging, his mouth opening wider than anatomically possible as he let out a screech that sounded like grinding metal. He's going to destroy his own arm, Aizawa realized, his experienced hero instincts flaring. And the resulting shockwave could kill the students behind him. Aizawa didn't hesitate. He grabbed the scarf around his neck and activated his quirk. His eyes flashed a brilliant, glowing red. His hair defied gravity, standing on end as the erasure quirk locked onto Izuku Midoriya. Erasure worked by temporarily shutting down the quirk factor, the genetic appendage responsible for superhuman abilities, stopping the flow of power at the source. Aizawa waited for the glow to fade. He waited for the black scales to retract. He waited for the boy to collapse in exhaustion, but nothing happened. In fact, it got worse. Izuku's arm didn't regress. The purple light grew brighter, nearly blinding. The scales began to spread, crawling aggressively up Izuku's shoulder and toward his neck. The dorsal plates on his back violently tore through his gym shirt, jagged and bloody, glowing with the same radioactive fury. Thud. 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 The heartbeat pounded in Aizawa's ears. Aizawa's eyes widened in absolute shock. The strain of using erasure was giving him a headache, but it wasn't working. It was like trying to use a fire extinguisher on a volcano. Why isn't it erasing? Aizawa's mind raced, sheer panic gripping the underground hero. My quirk works on everything. Mutation, emitter, transformation. I shut down the quirk factor. Unless, a horrifying realization dawned on Shota Aizawa. Unless there is no quirk factor, you cannot erase a dog's tail. You cannot erase a bird's wings. You cannot erase fundamental, base-level biology. What Izuku was doing wasn't a superpower. It was his natural state of existence. Izuku's unhinged jaw glowed purple. He was preparing to throw the ball, but the energy was too much. The localized evolution was spiraling out of control. If he threw it now, the recoil wouldn't just break his arm. It would vaporize half his torso. Stop! Aizawa roared, his voice cracking with desperation. Aizawa abandoned his quirk. He launched himself forward, tossing the capture weapon. The durable, carbon fiber interwoven scarf whipped through the air, wrapping tightly around Izuku's mutated, glowing right arm, his torso, and his waist. With a massive heave, Aizawa yanked backward, using his entire body weight to pull the boy out of the throwing stance, and slamming him onto the dirt. The impact broke Izuku's concentration. The cage door slammed shut. The biological imperative to evolve, suddenly cut off from its emotional trigger, violently aborted the mutation. Gaawa! Izuku shrieked, thrashing on the ground wrapped in Aizawa's scarf. The regression was infinitely more painful than the evolution. The black scales rapidly melted, the hardened flesh liquefying and seeping back into his pores. The massive dorsal plates on his back retracted with sickening crunches, leaving behind raw, bleeding, red keloid scars. The purple light died instantly. A massive cloud of scorching white steam erupted from Izuku's body, completely blanketing the throwing circle in a dense fog. The students screamed, scrambling backward in terror. Midoriya! Ida yelled, stepping forward, but the heat of the steam forced him back. Inside the cloud of steam, Aizawa held on tight. He didn't let go of the capture weapon. He scrambled forward on his knees through the blistering heat, ignoring the burns on his own hands, until he reached the boy. Izuku was curled into a tight fetal position. His right arm was a bruised, battered, smoking mess, though not entirely broken like in the entrance exam. His gym shirt was in tatters. His jaw had rehinged itself, but blood leaked from the corners of his mouth. He was hyperventilating, sobbing uncontrollably, his body racked with violent tremors. Aizawa knelt beside him. The underground hero looked at the boy's ruined, bleeding back. He looked at the tears streaming down the kid's face. This wasn't a reckless teenager trying to show off. This was a prisoner of war trapped inside his own flesh. Aizawa let go of the capture weapon. He reached out and placed a firm, steady hand on the back of Izuku's head, grounding him. Breathe, Aizawa commanded, his voice low, calm, and utterly devoid of anger. Focus on my voice, Midoriya. The transformation is over. You are in control. Breathe. Izuku gasped, choking on his own tears. I'm sorry. I couldn't. It was going to expel me. I had to. I'm not going to expel you, Aizawa said softly, the words for Izuku's ears alone. I lied about the expulsion. It was a logical ruse to draw out your upper limits. But you have no upper limit, do you? Izuku looked up at Aizawa, his green eyes bloodshot and filled with absolute terror. It hurts. Sensei, it hurts so much. Aizawa's heart broke. He had expelled entire classes of arrogant, self-righteous children because they didn't understand the weight of heroism. But this kid? This boy understood the weight of life and death better than any pro-hero Aizawa knew. He lived it every single second of his life. I tried to erase your quirk, Aizawa admitted quietly. It didn't work. This isn't a quirk, is it? Izuku shook his head weakly. I'm a monster. No, Aizawa said firmly, his grip on Izuku's hair tightening just enough to be reassuring. Monsters don't cry. You're a kid who was dealt the worst biological hand I have ever seen, and whoever told you to use that power without teaching you how to survive it is an idiot. Behind the school building, hidden in the shadows, Toshinori Yagi flinched, clutching his chest. Aizawa stood up, gently pulling Izuku to his feet. The steam finally began to clear, revealing the two of them to the terrified class. Izuku looked awful. He was covered in dirt, his right arm twitching, his clothes destroyed. But he was alive. Aizawa turned to the class, his demeanor instantly snapping back to the cold, severe teacher. The test continues, Aizawa barked, glaring at the stunned students. Anyone who looks away or slacks off gets expelled for real. Midoriya, you have one more throw. Do it. The class scrambled to pay attention, terrified of Aizawa's sudden ferocity. Izuku stood in the circle, cradling his right arm. He looked at Aizawa. Aizawa looked back, giving a nearly imperceptible nod. Use your humanity. I've got your back. Izuku picked up the softball with his left hand. He didn't focus on the cage. He didn't ask the beast for help. He focused on his feet, his hips, his shoulders. He focused on the dense, heavy muscles that he had built with 10 months of grueling, agonizing physical labor under the sun. He wound up, his left arm pulling back. He didn't need the fire. He didn't need the scales. He was Izuku Midoriya. With a fierce, entirely human shout, Izuku launched the ball into the sky. It didn't break the sound barrier. It didn't leave a trail of purple plasma. It just flew, carried by the pure, unadulterated strength of a boy who refused to break. The ball landed in the distance, bouncing into the grass. Aizawa held up the tracker. 150.3 meters. It wasn't 705 meters. It wasn't the highest score. But it was enough. It was more than enough. Izuku looked at the score. He turned to Aizawa, a small, painful, but genuine smile breaking through the blood on his face. Sensei. I can still move. Aizawa looked at the boy. For the first time all day, a genuine, proud smile tugged at the corner of the underground hero's mouth. Good. Go to the nurse's office. The rest of you, back to the tests. As Izuku slowly walked off the field, clutching his bruised arm, Aizawa watched him go. He knew the secrets of the world were dark and complex. But whatever this boy was hiding, Aizawa was going to figure it out. He's not a ticking time bomb, Aizawa thought, wrapping his scarf tightly around his neck. He's a crucible. And I am going to teach him how to forge that fire into a sword, before it burns him alive.